Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar presentation, KPIs for Engineering Leaders, brought to you by Jellyfish. I'd like to introduce you to our presenter, Krishna Kannan. Krishna is the head of product at Jellyfish, the leading engineering management platform that provides complete visibility into engineering organizations, the work they do, and how they operate. Prior to Jellyfish, Krishna led the enterprise product group at Pluralsight, helping large organizations build the skills necessary for digital transformation. At Pluralsight, he helped establish the Boston office and scale product organization through their IPO and beyond. He joined Pluralsight with their acquisition of Smarterer, where he also led product. Krishna holds a BA in computer science from Williams College and an MBA from Boston University. He loves to spend time with his family and believes in remaining curious and always learning. And with that, I'll pass it over to Krishna.
All right, well, thank you, Lucy, for that introduction, and welcome all to this webinar on KPI for engineering leaders. Excited to get started and chat with you all about this today. So as Lucy mentioned, my name is Krishna Kannan. I am the head of product at Jellyfish. Jellyfish is what we call an engineering management platform. And what that means is that we provide a platform to help engineering leaders manage their organizations in a more data-forward way, helping you understand what's happening with what you're actually working on and how well that's going. Now, my background is as a product leader. So I've been collaborating with engineering leaders and technical leaders my entire career at small companies, under 20 people, just trying to figure out their product market fit, and also working at really large companies, multi-thousand person companies that are in the public markets. And so through that time leading product organizations, I've also dabbled in engineering leadership and technical leadership, has given me a lot of empathy for the challenges of the engineering team. On the engineering side and on the R&D side, we don't necessarily have the same data available in our role that a sales leader might have, that might use Salesforce, or a marketing leader might have if they're using Marketo. But we're frequently asked the same types of questions. What are you working on? Are you focused enough on the strategic things? Are you guys actually delivering? What's your quality, and so on? And so we have this intuition that we build up in our careers about how to answer those questions. But frequently, intuition is not the best way to answer them for your peers and when you're managing upwards and horizontally in your organization. Without data, we don't know when our intuition leads us astray. We can't measure our improvement, and it's hard to marshal resources to the things that we know are important. And so it's for these reasons that engineering metrics can help you. And so I'm excited to dive in and talk about that in a more specific way. The first thing that we want to highlight here is that measurement works. Jellyfish has been in this space for 4 years now. We've worked with well over 100 customers, and we've seen from their experience that when you measure what's important to your organization, you can start to make changes that have an impact. The most important change, I think, is that we've seen our customers increase the amount of time they can spend on strategic roadmap work. Teams can see what's actually happening when they measure the data, and then they can create plans to change it and impact it so that they can spend more time where they want to be spending that time. We also see that by putting measurement in place, we see increased performance over what we would call basic activity metrics or productivity metrics. Our team's doing the basic blocking and tackling that's required to ship useful software. And so we see that as well across our customer base. Now, this is a little bit of a sidebar here, but it's important to note that us as vendors of an EMP are not the only ones who are out there in the market acknowledging this situation. There's a growing appreciation that engineering measurement is complicated and it's important. So here I'm just highlighting an article from earlier this year by Nicole Forsgren. She wrote the great book Accelerate about DORA metrics, the 4 things to understand your DevOps process. And what she and her co-authors are highlighting is that engineering is complicated. And so as engineering and technology leaders, we should push back on this idea that there is a single metric that tells us how good engineering is, because it's just not the case that there's a single metric there. You know, on the sales side, we know that sales is hard and that there are lots of metrics that tell us how well sales is doing, ranging from how many reps you have, what their onboarding process is, what your territory models are, what your retention rates are, et cetera, et cetera. And so you can sort of build those up into a series of things that inform you. And the same needs to be true on the engineering side. And so, you know, just highlighting this here as, hey, it's great to see third parties who are deep in the research see that measuring engineering is important and that it's hard and you can't do it with just one metric. You need to look at a basket of things to understand the overall situation that you might be in. So with that as the purview, we can get specific here about what's important to measure. So I want to share a framework that we present as a pyramid for what's important to measure what you're doing. So at the base, the most leverage comes from working on the right things. And this is a little bit obvious and yet counterintuitive, because it's often easier to measure the bits of work that you're doing. Am I writing code? Am I shipping code? Am I reviewing code, et cetera? But if you're getting really efficient at that, but you're literally coding the wrong things, your business isn't going to get the leverage it demands from the improvement that you make. So first things first comes from do the right things, even if imperfectly. So you want to have some way to measure, are we working on what's most important? When you have that, then you can understand your delivery process. Are we actually able to deliver quickly? Is there a repeatable process? Maybe it's a continuous integration, maybe it's continuous deployment, but is there some process in place to deliver the stuff that we make? You'll find bottlenecks in your process. You want to identify those and you want to triage those and get better. And then at the tip of the pyramid, once you're doing the right things, then you can optimize your productivity at a team level. And this is really about how the team works to ship code. Do they ship code frequently to de-risk it? Does code have multiple sets of eyes on it to improve quality? Are you doing pull requests? Are those being reviewed? Are there comments on them, or are they just passing through without review? That's at the top once you've established this base for success. Now, there are 5 broad buckets of things that we recommend that you as an engineering leader measure. The blue box is what I was talking about as the base of the pyramid. That is your investment metrics. What are we working on? And so at a lot of organizations, you'll have a concept of whether you call it roadmap work, strategic work, new feature work, but you've got some catch-all for those things. And those are the things that are going to move your business forward to be successful in the future. And then you have some level of sustaining work or keep the lights on work, maintenance work. You then might have bugs and quality work. You might have customer commitments that you're obligated to, and and so on and so forth. But internally, you likely have these buckets conceptually defined already, if not explicitly. And so you want to understand what your ratio is across those buckets. Now, I've found that in my experience, the ratios are going to differ company to company based on stage, based on the market, and they might even differ team to team. So you'll have teams that are new and they need to be spending the lion's share of their time on the strategic work. And then you have teams that are older and more established. They're going to have a bigger amount of maintenance work or sustaining work that they're going to have to do. And that's okay. These things don't all need to be the same, but you want to look at that and understand, are the ratios that we're seeing team to team making sense for the stage that those teams are in? Does your overall investment level make sense for the investment level of your company and the stage of your company. Sometimes we call that allocations. Same thing. Allocation is just where our time is allocated, where our investment is allocated. The second box is your quality box. That one is self-explanatory. You do need to know the quality of the software you ship. Is your software available via uptime? So that's important. Progress, productivity, process. These are things like, are people using the tools we have? Is software getting out the door? Where are the bottlenecks in our process? And where can we create improvement? The productivity one is a little bit of a tricky box to talk about. And so sometimes you might think of that as activity instead of productivity per se. But the idea is that the engineering teams and the technical teams need to be doing the steps in your process to ship the code. So if you're using Jira, are they opening Jira tickets? Are they closing Jira tickets? Do they make commits? Do they make pull requests? And these are activities, right? They don't, by definition, tell us that we're moving the ball forward. They tell us that stuff's happening. But the intent is that if your pyramid is aligned, once you get to this point of stuff happening, you know that that stuff is good stuff, it's valuable stuff, and it's pointing our product in the direction we want it to go because we're spending time on the right things. So that's productivity. Now, depending on your stage, you might be asking, do you need all of these buckets? Like, that feels like a lot. But if we go back to our earlier point, we should expect that there is a lot. You do need some indicator across the board here of what's happening, because I'm sure in your career you've been in situations where you're looking at the activity and you're seeing new code get written day to day, but then you don't see deliverables coming out the door, like nothing's actually ever getting shipped, or you're shipping but you're not seeing the quality that you want. So it's important to have one or more things in each of these buckets so you have this balance. You might think of it as a bit of a tension behind these things, because you can't move all the metrics at the same time, right? If you're trying to improve your speed, well, maybe you have to sacrifice a little bit of quality there, and it's up to you to determine what the right trade-off is. We've seen at Jellyfish that different industries have different balances of how they do these things, right? If you're in a heavily regulated environment, well, speed may not be the most important, but quality might be. If you're in a consumer environment, that analysis might be flipped. So as engineering leaders, you have, again, intuition around what the right balance is, and this framework allows you to identify and measure and put stakes in the ground for where you want to be across all these dimensions. So if we agree that this is important, and I hope we do, this is around, like, how do you get started, right? And so the first step in getting started here is that it's critical that you're using some type of issue tracking system that's digitally represented across your organization. And this is the representation of all the things that you're doing. So you can't measure, are we working on the right things, unless you're actually tracking the things that you're doing in some way. At Jellyfish, we have heavy support for Jira, and that's where most of the market is today. But to get started with this as a thematic process, you can use anything that's digital. What you want to be doing is moving away from a post-it note world or a physical Kanban board or Scrum board representation in the office, and something that's shared and online. Now, surprisingly, we do see some companies that are still in a physical world here. Most are digital, so let's make sure that we're digital here, particularly as the world moves more and more remote and more virtual. So have some issue tracking system. And step two is that you want to have a conceptual and literal link into your roadmap. So I'm on the product side, of course, and I don't build my roadmap in Jira, and most product people don't. They might use a product software like an AHA or a product board, but they probably use something like a spreadsheet or a PowerPoint or some deck, which they can use to articulate what they're doing on their roadmap. Hey, this is what we're investing in now. This is what we're investing in next. This is what we're investing in the future, potentially. And that's fine. Don't try to get your product team to change how they do their roadmap, but you want to create a relationship between the things in your Jira or in your issue tracking system and in your roadmap. And that could be as simple as adding custom fields to your Jira that link to themes, initiatives, business outcomes, customer outcomes that are in your roadmap that create this linkage there. The third step is integrating your Git and your source control with your Jira, so that when work is done there, you can create this connection of, okay, some code got written, I can understand what thing it got, what the purpose of that code was, and that's where that linkage comes in. So we think that if you take these three steps, it's fairly easy to get started. You have, hopefully you're using some abstraction layer like epics on your Jira, because that kind of summarizes the business value of your individual tickets. It's much easier to talk at a management level and communicate at a management level using epics rather than using individual stories or tasks or issues. And hopefully those epics are bounded, right? They're not infinite ongoing things, because you can't track completion if they're unbounded. So they should be tied to some value, some shippable, something like that. And then lastly, if you have some abstraction that sits above epics, right? This is that roadmap idea, like a theme, initiative, outcome that is broader, that helps you communicate and roll up these metrics that we're talking about in terms of, are we working on the right things? So a couple of additional notes here. So one is that there might be in your organization a different culture around team autonomy and organizational consistency. Each organization is different. I've personally worked in organizations where autonomy was really highly valued, and that was great because teams could create tooling for their own purposes. But it comes with a side effect of, it's very hard to track and improve metrics in that type of environment, but it's not impossible. So what you as the engineering leader want to look at is, what is our culture around autonomy versus consistency? And then how can I align my measurement needs against that? So for example, if you have a truly autonomous culture like the one that I've worked in previously, it might not make sense to compare cycle times across teams, because teams are doing different things for their cycle time. But instead, you might want to benchmark them against themselves, and that's a perfectly acceptable thing. However, you still want to have some way of saying, well, what work are we doing? Is it strategic work or is it not strategic work? So we had a fixed set of categories across the org that we used for allocations. And so on a per metric or per metric category, doing that analysis of, like, how would we implement this in our culture? And do we need to evolve the culture to get better in this area? Or do we preserve that and evolve how we think about metrics to better fit it? That's a question that only you can answer with your teams, of course, for your organization's culture. All right, so let's take a look at a couple examples of how this might look in practice. And so here I am sharing some examples from Jellyfish, just to be illustrative. And so this example here is, are we doing the right thing? So this is how it looks. So we talk a lot about do the right thing first, then optimize it. This is how that looks. So in this view, there's a stacked bar graph that simply shows you time period over time period where your time is being spent. Are you spending it on strategic work, or are you not spending it on strategic work? And so depending on your level of sophistication, you might be looking for consistency over time here. You might be looking for change in the distribution. You might be trying to drive one of these categories out, right? Maybe you've got an other catch-all here that really shouldn't be there. You need to drive that out by having better data hygiene. But this is what that looks like. You want to understand time period over time period the change you're creating, and is that right for the group of people, whether it's a team, group, organization, etc., and their level of maturity. That's the analysis, and this is one representation of what that could look like. The next one I want to share is, are we tracking to deliver? And I think this one is actually really, really important and really, really interesting as you get more operational with this. So let's say you've solved the first problem, we're doing the right things. Now you want to make sure that the right things are actually getting out into the market in a predictable way. So you want to highlight what's high risk here. How do I drill into that and be more successful? So this can be something that you're looking at on a frequent basis. And what's great about doing it this way is it lets you move beyond a traffic light style red, yellow, green reporting. I think back to my experiences where a number of times I've been looking at a spreadsheet prepared by my team. It's got all my initiatives in rows, and then each one's color coded, red, yellow, green, based on some subjective measure of its probability of launching on time or being completed on time. And you're always burned by something that's green but didn't finish because the scope changed or the resources changed under the hood, and it might have been green then, and then it quickly went the wrong way. And so what you want to see instead is, hey, are the resources changing on this project? Are the resources that are attached to it what I expect to be the case? So, hey, I put 5 people here, but why am I only getting 2 people's worth of activity? Where do the other 3 people go? Do we account for that? So you want to look at those type things. Is the scope going up or scope going down? And these give you a much finer grained sense of whether you're tracking to deliver, and you can double click into it and interrogate the data further and work with your teams to be more successful. And this is about uplifting your ability to be successful in that dimension. And that is our final example here. We have team optimization. Are we working efficiently and effectively? So this is, again, the top of the pyramid. And so for your team or your group, you want to identify the metrics that matter for you. In this example, we have a series of them, but they differ again by org. And look for the outliers. Look for the ones that don't align with your intuition about how the team is operating. If your team is expected to be checking in code every day, well, are your coding days reflecting that that's happening? This is something that team managers can be looking at very frequently. And then as you move up into skip level areas, they can be looking at it as a way to check and dive in and passively see what's happening, so you can understand where to go further, right? And this kind of removes the micromanaging burden because the data is all there and shared, so you can see, like, hey, I thought this team was doing things differently. Why is their data look the wrong way? And then tap the manager on the shoulder and have a discussion about that. So team optimization might look something like this, where you're looking at trends, you're looking at outliers, and double clicking from there. All right, well, that is the overview of using engineering metrics and KPIs for engineering leaders. I'd love to hear, Lucy, if there are any questions that have come in that we can address.
Yeah, so it looks like we have a couple. The first one is, what is the minimum team size that benefits from tracking these metrics?
Yeah, that's a great question. And maybe there's a couple ways to think about that. No matter what your team size is, there's a benefit to tracking some subset of these metrics. And depending on how small your team is, you might just know a lot of these things and not need a metric. when you start getting to, 25, 50 people engineering organizations, and at that point you're likely having engineering leader, 2 or 3 intermediary leaders, and then teams, it's critical to measure these things, and it's almost definitely required that you have a tool in place to do it. The scope is too big to try and paper and pencil it. At Jellyfish, we have customers who have team sizes of 25 to 50 and find that a tool is beneficial. Um, Below that, you want to start tracking these things, you may not need a tool to do it. We've also seen that as companies move more virtual, expand their hiring, that also is a factor. So it's not just team size, but also location of team and decentralization of it. So if you want to create a high trust decentralized team, tracking some metrics that everyone can agree upon is a great way to do that without being overbearing.
All right. The next question is, when we have new employees, what should we look at to make sure that they're progressing as expected?
Yeah, that's great. So we see this a lot actually, um, it being used for new employees. So one thing that's pretty typical in the industry is when a new employee starts, you give them their first ticket, their first issue to create, and so you want to say like, okay, have they created that issue? Did they close it? Did they check in code? Did someone review it? And so the activity metrics or the productivity metrics, that fifth bucket is where you want to look, and you want to be seeing, okay, did those first day, first week, first month things happen, right? They should happen, and if they're not, why is that person not getting off the starting line? And then you want to look at their progress on the productivity versus the team that they're on, and that gives you a really healthy way to look at their data in context, because you're comparing them to their peers that they're working with every day versus some outsider pool, and say, okay, are we seeing that as this person gets ramped according to our ramp time, that their coding days, their cycle time, their commits, their reviews start to match other people for that part of that tenure length, which is really important. Again, this is very useful for frontline managers, and it's also useful for skip levels. As you're bringing in a lot of people across a lot of different teams, you can go and say, all right, are my new people ramping up as we expect? And if not, how do we create some interventions to make them more successful?
All right. The next question is, how do leadership teams integrate metrics like these into operational processes?
Yeah, so we think that the most important integration point is with those allocation charts, which is the base of the pyramid. That's where you want to start in terms of, are you communicating to executive peers, to the board, and to senior leadership what you're actually working on, and making sure it aligns with what the business expects you to be working on and the commitments and strategies that you've undertaken. So that's like the first thing you're doing. So whether that's a monthly, quarterly cadence, there's something there. And we see that pretty frequently from customers, that they use allocation, which is your investment mix, in that setting. As you get more operational and more tactical, and you've pointed in the right direction there, we see a lot of customers use these data points in senior staff meetings to manage to desired outcomes. Teams are aware of the data, they're aware of the goals, and they can manage their work accordingly. And what they often will try to do is run experiments on their process and then look for the results in their platform and their tool to see that the change has occurred. So if you've got teams that you want to drive, let's call it more collaboration, you can look at the pull request comments, and so forth, and start seeing, hey, I made an intervention here. What are my results look like 1 week, 2 week, 3 weeks later? And review that as part of your operational senior leadership and leadership meetings.
All right. So it looks like one attendee has said, One of the ways I measure investment is by dollars rather than by heads. So 3 senior heads and 3 junior heads are very different costs. How do you apply that lens to these metrics like allocation?
Yeah, that's a great point. We do hear that frequently. So, you've got your architects, you got your principals, your senior engineers. They cost one amount. You have your junior team members, maybe you have interns, co-ops, they cost different amounts. So the views we showed are on a per FTE basis, which does flatten that out. And that is useful directionally. So if you don't have cost or salary data, there's a lot of value you get from doing it on an FTE or full-time equivalent basis. Like that's very good. You can act off that. In Jellyfish, just as an example, one thing you can do is attach salary data, compensation data at an individual or at a role basis. You can say, hey, my architects get paid X, my principals Y, my junior engineers Z. And then you can actually toggle between different views of your investment matrix. So you can understand, hey, this is from a time perspective, how much time we're spending. And then from a dollars and cents perspective, this is how much we're spending. All people are not equal in terms of their compensation. And so definitely agree with the question here. If you're trying to understand dollars and cents investment, it's a great idea to make sure you're using a tool rather than trying to paper and pencil it, and that you can import salary data or even salary ranges. It doesn't need to be that specific to give you a good idea. Salary ranges into the system and get that analysis toggled.
All right, someone else asked, assuming we're measuring some or all of these KPIs, how do I know that my team is doing well? What does doing well mean?
Yeah, this is a great question. And one part here is using benchmarks, right? It is helpful, though not exhaustive, to know what else is happening in the industry, so you can understand, what typical is. It doesn't necessarily tell you what good is. It does tell you what's typical, because the whole industry might be struggling with a thing. So you do need to have a little bit of that lens when you're looking at benchmark data, that they're directionally helpful, but not the answer for you. The other thing that I think is really helpful is to use your own data as baselines and make comparisons. So we hear this a lot from engineers themselves and from first line managers, that they don't necessarily want to feel like the purpose of engineering metrics is to hold them to some standard that's arbitrary, but to look at it in the spirit of continuous improvement and helping them reach their outcomes more effectively. And so from that lens, you can do intra-team comparisons of, hey, we want to get better at thing X. Here's the basket of metrics that help us. Let's see how we're doing, and can we create change there? And you can do inter-team comparisons. Hey, at our organization, we've got 20 teams. These 2 or 3 teams are known to be the standard. What do their metrics look like? And what's required to get other teams' metrics to move in that direction? So you can use that data as an understanding of what good is, and then make adjustments for context that might be different in the team where you're trying to create the change. And that way it's fair to the people who are trying to work differently and still ambitious, because you're trying to look like a better example of good. So a blend of market-based benchmarks, inter-team and intra-team benchmarks, depending on context, is a really good way to understand if you're doing well and drive the improvement to the level that you need to drive it to.
All right, and it looks like we had just one more question come in. How much do gaming metrics factor into this, and how do we avoid it?
Yeah, I'm surprised this was didn't come up more frequently. This is one that we hear a lot, actually, is that there's a concern, if I can read into the question a little bit, is that there's a concern that when you use metrics as goals, you affect behavior too much. People optimize for that metric, and that's what we see as gaming. Um, you know, Maybe a controversial opinion here is that to some extent, you might want some things that feel gamey if it's creating behavior change. For example, if you're trying to drive shorter cycle times, because it's a good thing to have de-risked feature releases, you want your team to think about, well, what are we doing wrong on cycle time and how can I get it better? Like, you want the focus that it creates, but you don't want the bad artifacts of changes that show up in the data that aren't meaningful changes. And the way to do that is really around the incentive structure and the buy-in of the process. In terms of incentive structure, if we move from one metric, which is assuredly wrong, to a basket of metric approach, it's a lot harder to artificially create gains that aren't real, right? So you have a basket approach. And so as a corollary to that, you don't want to incentivize one thing. You want to have incentives on multiple things together. And then depending on your culture, you want to make sure that your incentives are at the right level. So it's less likely to be the case that you want to incentivize individuals to change their workflows. Incentives are more effective for these things at a team or a group level because, again, they're less subject to artificial or gamey changes if they're done at a broader level. But the basket is the key point there. So it's not just one thing that you can fake. The second piece that I mentioned is the buy-in. So a top-down directive of you must fix this metric is more likely to result in faking or artificial gains than a more servant leadership approach of, hey team, we need to get better at this concept. Here are the basket of metrics that we think address that. Let's have a dialogue about which in that basket do we care about, which in that basket can we affect, and getting some buy-in on like the specific metrics that you're using, the specific targets that you're picking, and then the buy-in is going to decrease the likelihood of artificial gains because the team has raised their hand and said, hey, these are things we can do. They're going to approach it differently than I was told to do X. I don't really think that's important, so I'm going to fake that and I'm going to keep doing Y. So both of those I think are appropriate ways to decrease the game mechanics and the artificial nature of it.
All right, and it looks like that was actually the last of our questions.
Okay, awesome. So thanks again, everyone, for listening to this. It is a privilege to get a chance to talk to folks here. Just to reiterate the key points, we do think that KPIs for engineering management and leadership are important. We think they can help you do better in terms of working with your peers, working with executives, working with your board, and working with your teams themselves. It's not a vertical thing only. So we think it's important. We think it can help you. It's hard, so that's okay. There's not one thing to rule them all. And we really encourage you to start where the most leverage is. The most leverage is working on what's most important and then optimizing as you go upward into actually executing on the thing that's most important. A finely tuned machine doing the wrong thing is not awesome. Doing the right thing at 80% is going to be much better. So start there and keep moving. And that's all. So thank you very much. Back to Lucia to wrap up.
All right, well, DZone would like to thank Krishna for a fantastic presentation, and DZone would also like to thank Jellyfish for providing the audience with a great webinar. And lastly, thank you to everyone who attended today. We hope you learned something new that will help you in your developer career.